is better, right?
Are they same? Like I don't know. Like Bose and Basu.
Batao, Ananya.
Not exactly, but people differ from different, caste, and so it's like Bose. You can say Bose or Basu. Like yeah, you can say in Bengali they say Bose as just like that.
It is anglicization of Bengali names. Chattopadhyaya could not be pronounced by British very easily, and that's why they made it into Chatterjee. Bandyopadhyay becomes a complicated name to pronounce for the British. For their convenience, they made it Banerjee. And Basu also doesn't become very easy to pronounce for the British. That's why they made it into Bose. Thakur ka anglicization Tagore hua. So these are anglicizations of Bengali surnames. And as Indians, I don't think we need to anglicize somebody's surnames, do we? Indian लोगों की सरनेम से anglicize करने की कोई जरूरत है? Is there any need for that? Is there any need?
No.
No, sir.
Yes. This is also part of your syllabus, Pooja, this digression. Because if you don't understand Bengali surnames, आप Indian literature पढ़ ही नहीं सकते.
I just forgot his name. That was the only issue. But yeah. Yeah, I get it. So yeah, I was talking about influence. So Holderlin was kind of influenced by Goethe's tradition. So that is like an example of influence. Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? Hölderlin being influenced by Goethe. You can mispronounce German names in my class and get away with it. Goethe को कोते कह सकते हो, Hölderlin को Holderlin कह सकते हो, चलेगा.
But I'm like actually learning German, so Germans do pronounce him as Goethe. So I'm like, okay. But like I'm not very sure since I have just read one work of Goethe and only one essay from Holderlin. So
what do you mean when you say somebody is influenced by something?
They try to show something in their work which is actually present in also the work of the person they have been influenced from. So that could be anything like ideas, structures, language, literary style, or etc.
And when we talk about films, do we talk about influences?
Yeah.
So where do we use the idea of influence when we talk of films?
Can we say, like, for example, a film has certain storyline which is kind of influenced from a novel or something?
So what do you mean by that influence? I say I'm trying to figure out the meaning of the word influence.
Many similarities.
Similarities, okay.
Yeah.
Similarities of?
Structure, stories.
Stories. What else?
Language.
Language.
Yeah.
And characters.
Characters, emotions, portrayal.
Okay. Film might reinforce or negate existing beliefs of people. I am asked, okay, in that sense also you're talking of influence, Preeti, as a kind of reinforce and negate existing beliefs of people. Yes, so influence in that sense as well. So existing belief, it may reinforce or it may also negate those beliefs, or similarities of structures, patterns, characters, language that Pooja has talked about. That is also another way of thinking about influence. But we also talk about, ever since Plato, bad influence and good influence. Na? So when you say similarity, there is also a value judgment associated with it, Pooja. Would you agree to that? It's not just you are saying उसमें ये चीज और यहाँ पे भी एक चीज है, there is a similarity. You don't make a statement like that. There is a certain value judgment associated with the idea of influence. Yes or no?
Yeah.
So what are those value judgments that you can think of? When you say that particular Bollywood film is influenced by, inspired by a particular Hollywood film, what judgment do you pass on that film?
It could be possibly negative.
Like?
Like maybe like since we watch Hollywood movies and they kind of become standard. So when a Bollywood movie tries to portray how they have been influenced and show it in their movie, we would kind of be like, array, they did not try their best. Like this is not how it was supposed to be. This is what Hollywood did it better, or this is like more cringier than the Hollywood, something like that. But kind of more negative is what I would say.
Exactly. So there is a negative value judgment associated with influence, and that can be of, say, for example, they didn't do as well as the Hollywood because Hollywood is the standard, right? And the
Usually in
Bollywood.
society, yeah.
Pardon? Come again?
No, that's what I was saying. Usually everybody thinks Hollywood is a standard, so that is how they.
Yeah. I'm not pointing that you are saying that. I'm just talking about how people think on these lines. So it is held up as standard, and this is usually seen as not living up to that standard, right?
Yes, sir.
And many times, the novel or the film, which is taking something from somewhere else, may not try to show that they are doing so. ऐसे हो सकता है. They don't say that हम वहां से ले रहे हैं. बराबर है. ऐसे भी हो सकता है ना.
हो सकता है. They might not directly show us that they are being influenced by somebody or something, but there might be some indirect hints or some subtle I don't know portrayal of things which would give us a hint like they are kind of influenced, which might also not be true.
And they might be trying to hide that influence.
I'm not sure.
Anyone wants to say something? You are absolutely right. You have brought in very important ideas that we need to look at critically at this juncture. Yeah, anyone wants to add to what she's saying? What Pooja is saying? The whole idea of influence. Does comparative Western literature still considered as dominant? Sohan, I didn't get your question. And Preeti, my question is, can anyone wants to add to what Pooja has already said?
Sir, can I just say something? Like I have this doubt, like what Pooja said and what you said in response regarding the negative judgment thing and the influence thing. So can the movies which are influenced or which are taken from the novels and novels turned into movies, even they have this negative judgment thing or something like that? Like currently I am reading the Harry Potter series and I've seen the movies as well. So there is so much which is not included in the movie. Like the beginning section is not included. There are a lot of things. So is this also be, what I'm trying to say is that influence is being hampered with. They're not taking as it is.
It
It
is
is
not
based on
like
the novel.
it is not like the original standard
Yeah,
जैसा नहीं,
exactly. हाँ,
but this
original जैसा नहीं है.
it is not living up to the standard of the original.
Yeah.
So this is something similar to what Pooja is saying, right? That
Yeah, kind
film
of.
does
This
not
is what
live
I
up to
think.
the standard of the original novel. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a negative judgment.
I'm not sure, but maybe, or I might not understand the negative judgment thing properly.
How many of you agree with what Faisal and Pooja is saying? That the film does
So
not
could you
live
please
up
repeat?
to. How many of you feel that the film does not live up to the standard of the original? Okay, Faisal feels so. Who else? Shreya? No one else agrees with Faisal? I will come to Sohan your questions, but let's finish this conversation on influence. Is that okay? Because this is the most important point.
Sir, um, it's like very difficult to just compare it and tell that this movie does not live up to the original novel, because that would also be kind of solely disregarding the movie, because movie does not always have to justify, or the director probably does not want it to be solely how the novel was and something like that. So there are different reasons why a movie is not like the novel, but
Exactly.
however.
And one of the reasons is also what Preeti is saying here in the chat box, that the mediums are different.
Oh, yeah,
Apart
exactly.
from the fact that you said that the director does not want to make it like novel, right? Wants to do something else with that story, right?
I would
Right,
agree.
Pooja?
Yes,
Who
sir, I
said
would
this,
agree with
Pooja or Shreya?
Preeti. Preeti said it.
Preeti.
And sir, I think adoption involves the reworking area, which is suits with the some TRP and other platforms right now
Very
we
good.
have faced
Right.
in
So these
modern
are other
intervention.
constraints
Yes.
that market and TRP become another constraint on the director. Apart from the fact that there's a different media, apart from the fact that the director may want to do something else with the uh, uh, things that he's taking from the novel, it's also he has to keep his audience in his mind. If agar wo log, that's his market. You're investing millions of dollars in making a film. You don't want to lose out on them. There are financial constraints of market, right? But people don't think on these lines, do they? People think that the film is not good. Don't judge novel by its film. ऐसे मैं बहुत बार सुनता हूँ.
But sir, here is the question mark about the literary model through imitation, like benefit and some exciting artistic theories and practices, especially theories and practices, because books are like just theory. Uh, uh, like as an audience, we have been being created nowadays.
Yes. So, what is the point that you are making?
Right. Third point is just a point of view about the style and present area of novel and movies and.
So
Right.
what if a film is a bad adaptation of the novel but a good film in itself? I mean, it's a good film, but if we compare it with the novel, or like for example, if someone is looking for consistency in the storyline, or looking for certain similarities, so it is a bad adaptation of that particular novel, but it can be a good as a movie, it's a good movie. If we talk about, let's say, technique or just how it is, if we did not know that it was based on some XYZ novel, we would have loved it.
I think
But
this also.
ये good bad वाला जो है ना मसला प्रीति, good bad adaptation but good movie, you're still bringing in some notions of good and bad which we as students of comparative literature should examine, right? What is bad adaptation and what is good movie? Bad or good kya?
I guess, sir, we keep on looking for consistency in and similarities as it has
Consistency to what? Consistency to what?
to we expect okay, I need to articulate this.
Anyone else? Yes, read the book for Hollywood spoils it. Okay.
So what Preeti said also like is like parallel to the art for art's sake thing. Like if there's something like a movie, so you should watch a movie as the movie and don't compare it to something else. So that otherwise, if you do that, you are bound to dislike it to the from the original or like it more
So
from
why
the
are you bound to dislike it? ये मेरा question.
Because I think we are always stuck with the idea that we have to compare it with the standard, and it has to be as the standard original is.
Standard concept, original standard.
Original.
So consider in the idea of influence or taking material from some other culture or language, there is a tendency to judge one text as standard and original and the other text as inferior and not as good as the original. There is this inherent tendency to consider a copy as something which is bad. Copy as inferior to original is an idea that has come down to India from a gentleman called Plato. पहले इंडिया में ऐसी कोई आइडिया थी नहीं. Plato said that the real thing, right, is in the domain of ideas in our mind, which we can access through reasoning alone. The thing that you see in front of you is imperfect and transient. Time will spoil it. The wall that you are seeing in front of you will be destroyed by time. Secondly, it is also not perfect. Rectangle जो perfect दिमाग में है वैसा नहीं है wall का, right? So the real stuff is in mind according to Plato. So yeah, can you turn off your mic if you're not saying something? Shreya, if you're not saying something, can you just? Okay, coming back to the point of influence, right? And original and the copy, derivative. There is a tendency to think of the text which takes material from elsewhere as being inferior to some standard which is original. Now, this idea is problematic because there is a double standard involved here. And what is that double standard? When Shakespeare takes his materials from Raphael's Holinshed or Seneca, or he takes his material even from contemporary romances by Thomas Lodge, which was made into his play called As You Like It. He's taking material, storyline, characters from elsewhere and making it into his own. But nobody says that Shakespeare is inferior. But if an Indian author does it, takes material from elsewhere and remakes it, redoes it, recycles it according to his or her needs, then that person is seen to be copying the West and derivative, lacking genius. So there is a double standard at work where Shakespeare is seen as producer and our cultures are seen as reproducers, right? And therefore inferior, lacking in genius, creativity, and originality. So the source is considered superior to the receiver in the idea of influence, right? So our thinking about influencer and influenced is deeply saturated with this prejudice, which did not exist in India before. In fact, a play, Natak, has to tell a story which is well known according to Natya Shastra. You have to tell, and if you make it a new story, it was called Prahasana, right? You have to take stories from Itihasa and Purana. So Shakuntala is taken from Mahabharata. Kalidas does something else with that material, right? Or Uttar Ramcharit is what we'll be talking about in the next unit, but has taken something from Ramayana by Bhavabhuti, right? Urubhangam by Bhas takes the character and story from Mahabharata and redoes it. But that is not seen as inferior to Mahabharata. I hope you get it.
Yes, sir.
Influence is or rewriting or retelling or reusing the existing material which is there is not seen as an inferior activity on Indian subcontinent before British bring their Eurocentric notions of originality and copy here. Therefore, what happens is that the Western culture is seen as original and colony is seen as derivative. उनकी डेमोक्रेसी डेमोक्रेसी, हमारी डेमोक्रेसी डेरिवेटिव. उनकी मॉडर्निटी मॉडर्निटी, हमारी मॉडर्निटी चोरी, कॉपी, inferior derivative version, right? And that is why there is a need to rethink the whole notion of influence. Yeah, Rushi, what are you saying? Batao.
Sir, if we are saying that the Britishers came here and brought the notions of derivative, then didn't Shakespeare also derive all of his plays from the originals, which were Greeks and
Isn't
Romans?
that the point I am making? You are saying same thing which I am saying. That if you take stuff from other places, but if you are white and powerful, then that is not seen as being derivative. Picasso took African masks for his paintings, but that was seen as his creative genius. But if African painter is influenced by Picasso, he is seen as lacking in genius. You get these double standards at work. हॉलीवुड में जब बॉलीवुड का गाना बजता है तो वी थिंक इट्स अ कॉम्प्लीमेंट टू बॉलीवुड, राइट?
Post-colonial hangover, sir.
Bollywood as a bad copier of Bollywood.
Sir, we always need legitimacy from Europe.
From the West. क्योंकि तभी आप मास्टर से करीब जा सकते हो ना. मास्टर आपको पीठ पे से वेल डन ऐसा कहे तो हम कॉलर ऊपर कहते हैं. So the point that is being made here, that the idea of influence cannot be used just like that in India as it is used in the West because of several reasons. And what are those reasons, Pooja, are given just below that line. I don't know if you have read it. right? Look at this, page number 14, जहाँ पे आप पढ़ रहे हो. There was again a shift during this period as the term influence began to be questioned by several scholars, and particularly so in the colonized countries where there is a tendency to look for influences even when they are not. If you find similarity between Uttar Ramcharit and Winter's Tale, and Komal is going to talk about it tomorrow. Komal and who? Who is it? Who else?
Preeti.
Preeti. We are going to talk about it tomorrow. Right? Now there is similarity between Winter's Tale by Shakespeare and Uttar Ramcharitra. Now Britishers would try to say that this similarity is also because of Bhavbhuti's knowledge of Western culture. कहीं से ऐसे चल रहा था उस टाइम पे, right? In order to prove that this similarity is out of, so if there is similarity between Ramayana and Iliad, the colonizers would try to think that this is Valmiki is influenced by Homer, right? So that they stay in their position of power and superiority, right? Secondly, it goes on to say, look at this. The focus therefore shifted to reception in books, page number 14. Like the one by the present author, that is Subha Das Gupta, Bibliography of Reception of World Literature in Bengali Periodicals from 1890 to 90. In several articles, one on the reception of the novel in Bengal, for instance, the receiver and emitter was in focus. This also implied that the receiver was taking elements from another culture in according to her own needs or needs of the system, while the foreign elements underwent a transformation in accordance with the norms, elements, and ideologies in operation in the system at given moment. What does this mean? It means, I don't know if you have seen Heather and Hamlet, or Makbul and Macbeth, or Othello and what was that? Omkara. You've seen Vishal Bharadwaj's trilogy, Shakespeare trilogy? How many of you have seen that film? Tasneem has seen. Who else? No one. हैदर नहीं देखी आपने? कितने लोगों ने देखी है हैदर? एक ही. You're not seeing Heather? Two people in the class of 16. You don't watch films? I can understand that you're too lazy to read books, but not even watch films. Film is the book for the lazy. How many of you agree? Film is the book for the lazy people. Only two people. So how can I give you the example of that if you are not seeing? Okay, how many of you have watched any adaptation of Western film or in Hindi? Koi bhi. Or a book? Which one, Komal?
It's kind of a funny story.
Go ahead. Funnier the better.
But it is a novel and it was adapted into a movie. It sort of talks about a person who goes to a mental institution, and when it comes to comparing, I'd never put the two of them together because I individually like both of them separately. So
Which one are you talking about?
what? The movie and the novel.
Which ones? Which novel and which movie?
Um, novel and movie name is the same. It's kind of a funny story. Also, I can
Acha.
take the
You like both of them separately.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because the first one in the book, it had a sort of very cool monologue going on, and in the movie, the actors were pretty great, and also they didn't take some aspects from the novel, but they added some of their own, which I thought was pretty nice.
And why do you think they added some of their own?
Because it happens like with translations as well, because I remember the first discussion we had on translation and everyone was like, I got super anxious because I kept on thinking I can never speak other languages and there will always be elements that I'll keep on missing. And after the lecture was over and I felt like, it's okay, like if I'm missing those elements, that's the point. Same thing happens with movies and adaptations. Like some elements have to be since it's like a transfer from one media to another medium, so some elements would be missing, but then you can bring out certain aspects like the other medium which specializes it in.
So this statement, this also implied that the receiver, that is the filmmaker, was taking elements from maybe another culture or another form in accordance with her own needs or the need of the system, while the foreign elements underwent a transformation in accordance with forms, elements, ideologies, and oppression in the system at a given moment. So if you have seen something called Haider, then it's set in contemporary Kashmir, right? Hamlet is set in Denmark, though the audience of the play were British, right? And the storyline is about Denmark and the Prince Hamlet who smells something is rotten in the state of Denmark. That's what is happening in Britain. So the audience is British. And what is happening on the stage, the setting of the play is Danish, right? What happens here is that the setting is modern Kashmir. So you can see that there is no equivalence at the level of setting. Now you may say that this is a bad adaptation or inferior to Hamlet because it changes the setting. Yes, no. It's a bad, there is, it lacks something of the original. Now the question is, why is there setting in Kashmir and why is Denmark done away with? But if you pass a value judgment, then that's the death of research very often. Very often, not always, very often. Because value judgment can impede, obstruct your access to the material for analysis. How many of you agree with me? I will give you my example. For example, I hate most of the TV serials, right? Most of the TV serials in Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati. I loathe them. But because of this value judgment, these texts are not available to me for analysis. And that analysis would tell me more about Indian society than any sociological or cultural work will. किताबों से ज्यादा मुझे ये सब टेक्स्ट के एनालिसिस से जानने को मिलेगा. But my prejudice comes in the way of my analysis. So do you think that is true? Does that happen? Prejudice can become a block, impediment for knowledge. How many of you would agree? Yes, Pooja. Can you see some examples? Komal, Pooja, Preeti. Personal examples where you can see that your dislike for something comes in your way of understanding or having knowledge about that thing. Where does it happen? I gave you my example, and I'm sure it will resonate with many. But
I did not have a prejudice, but I see how people react to when I listen to songs from South Korea, like K-pop. Then, if I tell somebody that, they would instantly say, "Why do you listen to it? You don't even understand the lyrics." So that is like the first level of prejudice they have against songs which are from different languages. So that is like a very fine example that I see every time when I talk about songs from different countries. So yeah, that.
and what about there is also something music which you don't like, Pooja?
Yeah, I don't like music which are like Bhojpuri or like I am from UP, but I honestly do not like those songs.
Right. So your dislike can come in your way of understanding the social and cultural histories of
Yeah,
Bhojpuri
very
or you.
much so.
Right. So
but sir,
prejudice associated with influence, the idea of influence itself, can create an impediment for analysis of Indian literatures. And therefore, the idea of influence has to be rethought or even discarded in analysis of Indian comparative studies of Indian literature, is what is being mentioned in the question that you have raised. And something that I spent time discussing because that is at the heart of comparative studies. Because the older models of comparative literature very often met with the kind of prejudice which Macaulay had towards Indian literatures, that one cupboard of English novels or books is superior to all the books in the East. ऐसे Macaulay कहता था. And you can see this arrogance is coming from ignorance, right? And prejudice. So if you find arrogance somewhere, you are bound to find prejudice or ignorance beneath it, hidden beneath it. Ignorance and prejudice creates arrogance, right, of colonial type. So idea of influencer and influence is a hierarchic idea. That person who influences somebody is seen as standard against which the other has to be measured, and obviously it doesn't live up to the original because they are not the same, right? That is one of the basic reasons why you are against the idea of influence. And it can be replaced, as Subha says, by focusing on studying how did the foreign elements undergo transformation according to the requirements of the author or the system. That is what is more interesting. So for me, what is interesting is not why Haider is not like Hamlet. For me, what is interesting is that why has the author made these changes? That is more interesting question than why does Haider not live up to the standard of Hamlet, the canonical work, right? So idea of influence is counter-canonical. And the term which replaces it these days is called interliterariness. That's the term that Amiya Dev has used, right, to do away with this idea of influencer influence. and we will discuss it at length in paper 11 as well, when we study the methodologies of comparative literature. Okay, so does that help you to understand, Pooja, the question that you raised?
Yes, sir, definitely. I think it
So
was
what she's So what she's saying is, instead of looking at Hindi romanticism, जिसे छायावाद कहते हैं, as a derivative of European romanticism, right, or British romanticism, you have to look at it as how have Hindi writers appropriated some aspects of European romanticism and they have used it for their own purpose. What is the politics of that? Becomes more interesting question than saying that Hindi romanticism is inferior to or does not live up to the standards of Wordsworth and Coleridge. I hope you get what she's saying here.
I do, sir.
Right? Yeah, so what comes to your mind after reading this or after this discussion?
I think the main problem why I did not understand that two lines was because the definition of influence. I had whatever ideas I had about influence were kind of westernized and did not know about how Indian comparative scholars looked at it and stuff. So now I see.
Because you know what, Shakespeare तो originally है ना, canonically है, but you don't accept the fact that he has taken material from all over the place. In fact, university wits used to say that he is an upstart crow who decks his feathers using our feathers. He struts like a peacock. He's a crow who struts like a peacock using our feathers. ऐसे university wits कहते थे Shakespeare. So Shakespeare was accused of चोरी for box office, something that you are familiar with, right? You say, अरे ये फिल्म मेकर ने वो गाना चुराया है, so उसके पास क्रिएटिविटी ही नहीं है, पर आपको ये पता नहीं कि उसने भी कहीं से चुराया होगा जो आपको पता नहीं. Does that make any sense? Why is it? What constitutes Western as original is the fact that we don't know its sources. कहाँ से लिया है उसने?
Also that the Westerners are themselves who tell that they are the originals.
Yeah, they keep themselves as standard and then say, "Our Indian doesn't live up to our standard." There is a book by Franz Fanon called Black Faces and White Mask. ऐसा कुछ है. That means white people want black people to be like them and yet be unlike them. Right? So colonizers want Indians to be more like British but still not British. Why? Because they were the go-betweens, and that's what the classic 1835 minutes of Macaulay tell you. That we want to create a class of people who are mediators between the rulers and the ruled, who are Indians in blood and color, but white or European in their mind. I don't know, have you read this? Macaulay's Minute?
Yes, sir.
Did we discuss it?
Sir, we haven't, but over the years in different papers we have discussed it.
Okay, तो मैं एक बार ये दिखा के क्लास खत्म करता हूँ आपको. Macaulay's Minute. Here it is. The great text, right? 1835. So Macaulay is taking a call on spending 1 lakh rupees for reviving literature in India. So he insists on having English. And he says this, many things. We will have just, we'll point out some of them. Here, point number 10. I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit. Can you see this screen?
Yes, sir.
Either Sanskrit or Arabic, but what I have done, I could form a correct estimate. I have read translations of most celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works. I have conversed both with them, and I am ready to take Oriental learning at valuation of Orientalists themselves. I have never found one of them who could deny that a single shelf of good European library was worth the whole native literature of Arabia and in India. The intrinsic superiority of Western literature is fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the original plan of education. He says that भारत में जो कुछ संस्कृत में लिखा गया है, अरबिक में लिखा गया है, वो सब उससे बेहतर एक सिंगल शेल्फ ऑफ गुड यूरोपियन लाइब्रेरी. Okay. And then he goes on to say something very interesting. This is something that you should read. Yeah. Point number 34. We must do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions we govern. A class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste and opinions and moral and in intellect. To that class, we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of this country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from Western nomenclature, and render them fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of population. A class of Indians in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals and intellect. कैसे उसे class बनाना है? Do you think the man succeeded?
Yes, sir. He did.
And who is that class? Who fall under this class? कौन है ये लोग जो Indians in blood and color है, but in their taste they are English in tastes and opinions and morals and intellect? कौन है वो लोग?
Sir, are you asking in the
Yeah, I'm
present
asking.
or? Oh,
Yeah, I'm asking. Who are those people? कोई भी past हो या present में है ऐसे कोई दिखते हैं
sir, in
आपको?
the present तो मतलब हम सब भी आ ही गए ना उसमें. And back then it would be, well, first the rich upper caste communities.
So do we agree with
Sir,
this?
I think mostly privileged by culture and finance and all, upper caste. Mostly privileged.
Till today?
So today we can also, I mean, include the Indian middle class. However, to be honest, sir, it's a mess.
So who will you include in today's? Do you think Macaulay is working today? 200 years after this minute.
He is. But sir, I know we are talking about the double standards and our post-colonial hangover and the kind of inferiority complex that we have that we might not even realize. I also don't see some, I don't find it like entirely wrong considering that a lot of things in our own cultures and traditions were, well, extremely, what should I say, bad or like evil, all are social evils. I don't find it entirely wrong that things did change. I mean, okay.
No, there are evils, but I'm saying, Preeti, there are evils in our society. But the society that you hold up as the standard, is it free from those evils?
Not
Or
all of them, no. I guess they just have different ways to perpetuate the same evil.
ये वही लोग बोल रहे हैं जो हमको मॉरल सिखाने आए हैं, जो पूरी दुनिया का गुलाम बना के घूम रहे हैं, लूट रहे हैं, राइट? मैकॉले and company limited are robbing entire Asia, right? Enslaving people and indulging in slave trade. तो ये morals उनके हैं. And we don't cease from beating ourselves up, saying that there are evils in our society. Of course, there are evils, but then all societies have evils, right? Which is, show me one society which does not have evils or this kind of various forms of discrimination. Is there any such society in the world? But we use that to beat ourselves up. That's a problem for me. Agree or disagree?
Agreed, sir.
Of course, there are bad things in our society, and we should try our best to remove them. But then we use that to show that we use that to imply that we are inferior to them. That is, for me, is a problem. This is the culture which used to burn women who look different at the stake. Remember that. Right? This is the culture which had put Galileo in jail. This is the culture which had Holocaust. Right? Slavery, Holocaust, burning of witches.
So, you know, these are the
using
exact
atomic
things.
bombs on Japan. Who did that? But all the time we talk about, we love to point out कि look हमारे यहाँ इतनी सारी बुराइयां हैं. Yes, सभी जगह पे होती है बुराइयां, कहाँ पे नहीं होती. When we imply that West is better than us, that becomes a problem for me. There is not a single female president in America. Why? What's wrong? So these are the people who said that we are more rational, more scientific, more advanced than you are. And we accept that, and we accept our backwardness, and we look at our faults as markers of that backwardness. For me, that is a problem. The yardsticks that we take from are from those societies who don't walk their talk. We talk of humanism, but do colonialism, right? And do slave trade. तो ये कौन सी humanism हुई आपकी? Anything that you have to say?
Also the fact sir, that while a lot of people my age are, you know, trying to know more about how we were as a civilization before colonialism happened. I mean, it's of course impossible to know completely, but now that we are trying to understand our past better, we realize, I mean, I've discussed it even with other classmates often, that I mean, it's like we're wearing these you know, glasses, and we just can't, even if we try so hard, we can't really it is so ingrained, right? Or that we can't really look at it from a.
But we can be aware of these histories.
Yes,
and
so I mean
duplicities of this.
that's the most we can do. That consciously try to understand things. Because अभी तो
Yes.
मतलब सर ऐसा ही है ना कि हम यहाँ के भी नहीं रहे वहाँ के भी नहीं रहे या
मगर वहां पे होना क्यों चाहते हो आप?
नहीं होना नहीं चाहते बट वी कैन नॉट
नहीं रहे, वहां के नहीं रहे तो वहां पे होना ही नहीं चाहिए. आप यहीं पे हो और यहीं पे रहते हैं ना. The flip side of this, the flip side is, on one hand, there is a binary that we should try to avoid. One is to consider ourselves backwards to the West. Second is to glorify ourselves needlessly, inaccurately, right? That's the opposite. So, which is inaccurate historically. We should not indulge in that kind of glorification of our past, because it was not a glorious past, right? We don't need to glorify our past and try to show that we were greater than the West. These are the two pitfalls, extreme views, which can be dangerous. When we criticize our society, we should not consider that we are backward because of these faults. Secondly, when we try to glorify ourselves, we should not try to pick up something and say we were the greatest and the best. Instead, taking more nuanced view of ourselves and our past will help. That's my own position.
Yeah, and so this would require us to be more honest with ourselves, which is really difficult to do, collectively, especially when a lot of our society, I mean, we somehow have to, deify everything, the nation, the community, the woman, everything. We happen to dehumanize
So
living
these
entities.
tendencies of glorification are as dangerous as beating ourselves up for our backwardness.
Yes.
So we have to avoid both and take a nuanced position, looking at what actually is the situation, what's so about it. Yes, so what we'll do is we'll tomorrow have a presentation on the next topic. Now, after this introduction to comparative literature in India, we are looking at how various projects are built. What are various grounds of comparison that people take up as their projects? So we have got 8 examples of that, right? First is Lalita Pandit, second is Sitanshu Chandra, third is Paul Sawyer, fourth is Meenakshi Mukherjee, fifth is Aparna Dharwarkar, Priyamvada Gopal, Suji Tharu, and Dharwarkar. So you have got an example of 8 projects of comparative literature in India. Now all of them will have a different kind of orientation, and that's why you won't find any simple unified outlook, but they all use comparative methodology, right? And then in the last unit you will see Indian translation studies, and it somehow mirrors 411 paper, which begins by talking about the discipline, right? And then goes over to the tools of the trade, and then goes to introducing translation studies and the way it is done now. So this feeds into this. So it will move parallelly, and we will be comparing both as well. So what you can do, you can compare this unit 1 with the unit 1 of 411, unit 2 and 3 with that of 411, unit 4 with the unit 4 of 411. That also will help. Okay, so should we stop for today? So how did you find this conversation? interesting, relevant, not relevant.